Chapter 1. The Stain of Steel. The rain in Neo-Shanghai never truly stopped. It was a persistent, oily drizzle that clung to the chrome and neon, reflecting the city's frantic pulse in 1,000 shimmering puddles. Kaelen Vane, or as he was currently known, Kai, didn't bother to avoid them. He simply absorbed them, the dampness a familiar, almost comforting, layer against the chill that radiated from the monolithic Cyberdine Technologies building. He was, by all reasonable assessments, a failure, a spectacularly unremarkable one. His boots, perpetually coated in a greasy film of industrial cleaner, slapped against the polished floor as he methodically traversed the deserted West Wing. The automatic sanitation drones were quiet tonight, their whirring and beeping reserved for the heavily trafficked east and south corridors. This was his domain, a space of sterile gray, punctuated by the insistent hum of server racks and the occasional flicker of a holographic projection. Kai was a shadow, a ghost in the machine. Had deliberately chosen the janitorial role at Cyberdine, a deliberate act of exile. The Vane Mining Syndicate, his family's sprawling, ruthlessly efficient empire, was built on obsidian and rare earth, a legacy forged in the scorched mountains of the Shingan province. They were titans of industry, men sculpted from steel and ambition, their successes measured in terabytes and trillions. Kai, with his quiet demeanor and inherent aversion to boardrooms, felt like a misplaced cog, a fragile mechanism within a brutal, unfeeling system. He hadn't intended to stay for more than a month. A brief hiatus to clear his head, his father had called it, a generous euphemism for a strongly worded lecture about his lack of strategic engagement. But 3 months had bled into 6, the rhythmic sweep of his mop, a meditative counterpoint to the digital chaos of the building. Tonight's shift was particularly irritating. Director Sterling, the architect of Cyberdine's increasingly aggressive push into quantum computing, had taken a particular delight in observing Kai's work. Sterling, a man whose arrogance dripped from every polished syllable, seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from showcasing his superiority. Just scrubbing Kai? Sterling had boomed, his voice amplified by a neural implant, as Head deposited a generous puddle of lukewarm coffee directly onto Kai's freshly mopped floor. A waste of potential, wouldn't you agree? You could be analyzing data streams, optimizing algorithms, but no. You're reducing yourself to a glorified floor washer. Kai had simply absorbed the insult, his face an impassive mask. Head cleaned the mess with practiced efficiency, the scent of citrus-infused cleaner a small, defiant act of order in Sterling's deliberate disorder. The director predictably had followed up with a theatrical sigh. A fascinating specimen, Head declared, gesturing with a dismissive wave of his hand. The friction that slows down the machine of progress. Head then, for a brief, agonizing moment, planted his considerable weight onto Kai's back, using the janitor as a rudimentary footstool while discussing the intricacies of neural networking with a junior engineer. Head managed to avoid eye contact, though. Head learned quickly that direct confrontation was a strategic misstep. His power, the Void Stitch, was a tightly guarded secret, a dangerous legacy whispered only within the shadowed depths of his family's ancient bloodline. A single, uncontrolled release could unravel the very fabric of reality, a terrifying prospect he had rigorously trained himself to suppress. The only constant, the only flicker of genuine interaction Head encountered was with Ilara, a coder barely out of her teens, her fingers perpetually dancing across a holographic keyboard. She was a splash of vibrant color in the otherwise monochrome landscape of Cyberdine's research labs. Had observed her from afar, noticing her quiet intensity, the way she coaxed complex code from the machines with a patience that bordered on reverence. She possessed a mechanical soul, he thought, a rare quality in a world obsessed with raw processing power. Tonight, as he meticulously cleaned around the base of a massive quantum server, he noticed her. She was hunched over her console, a frown etched into her brow. "Trouble, Ilara," he asked, his voice low, careful. She startled slightly, turning to face him. Just a recursive loop in the core algorithm, she explained, her voice soft. It's frustrating. The system keeps throwing up errors, defying logic. He paused, considering. He hadn't spoken to anyone beyond acknowledging Sterling's dismissals. Perhaps, he offered, almost instinctively, a different perspective might help? He subtly shifted his weight, channeling a sliver of the void stitch, a barely perceptible ripple in the air. He wasn't consciously intending to influence her, merely observing the flow of energy around her. Elara paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. You understand? She asked, her eyes wide with a nascent curiosity. Kai simply nodded, his expression neutral. Sometimes, he said, the words barely audible, the most elegant solution lies in disrupting the established pattern. He began to clean again. A slow, deliberate motion, leaving a pristine streak across the polished floor, a stain of steel beneath the rain. The shift had ended, but the quiet battle within Kaelen Vane, the heir to a hidden empire, had just begun. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Void, the following week, settled into a disconcerting rhythm. Elara, visibly intrigued by Kaelen's cryptic pronouncements, began seeking him out during his shift. She'd linger near the server room, offering snippets of her coding struggles, a tangled cascade of binary, a frustratingly stubborn bug, and Kaelen would respond with a carefully chosen phrase, a quiet observation about imbalance or the need for a new angle. He never overtly explained the void stitch, never demonstrated its power, yet the air around him seemed to subtly shift whenever he spoke, a momentary stillness in the hum of the quantum servers. Tonight, however, felt different. The rain hammered against the building's reinforced windows, a relentless, watery percussion that seemed to amplify the static in the air. Elara was particularly agitated, her movements jerky as she wrestled with the core algorithm. The console's holographic display flickered with a chaotic dance of red and blue, mimicking a digital storm. It's feeding on itself, she muttered, running a hand through her already disheveled hair. The error is propagating exponentially. I've tried every protocol, every reset. It's like the system wants to break. Kaelen approached, his movements fluid and silent, almost appearing to glide across the polished floor. He didn't speak, simply observing her. Then, without warning, he reached out, his hand hovering a few inches from the console. The air around his hand shimmered, a barely visible distortion, like heat rising from asphalt. Elara froze, her eyes widening in a mixture of fear and intense fascination. "Don't," she whispered, instinctively pulling back. But it was too late. The ripple of dark matter energy, the void stitch, had begun. It wasn't a dramatic display of power, no blinding flash or shattering force. Instead, it was a subtle, insidious alteration. The chaotic display on the console began to coalesce, the red and blue swirling patterns resolving into a single clear line, a perfectly elegant solution to the algorithmic nightmare. Elara gasped, staring at the console in disbelief. How? Kaelen retracted his hand, the shimmering distortion vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He cleaned the area around the console with methodical precision, erasing any trace of his intervention. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low and measured, "the greatest resistance comes from assuming the problem is real." He didn't elaborate, but the implication hung heavy in the air. It was a carefully crafted lesson, a glimpse of the truth behind the void stitch, that the universe often presents challenges, not as problems to be solved, but as rigid patterns to be unmade. Suddenly, a harsh voice cut through the rain's drumming. "What's this? Janitor playing technician again?" Director Sterling stood in the doorway, flanked by two of his security guards. His face was flushed with irritation, a smirk twisting his lips. "Just offering a little assistance, Director," Kaelen replied, his tone devoid of emotion. He continued to meticulously clean, a deliberate, almost defiant act. Sterling took a step closer, his eyes narrowed. I thought you were simply mopping. You're not qualified to touch any of our equipment. Interference is strictly prohibited. He gestured to one of his guards. Report this to security. I want a full investigation. As the guard moved towards Kaelen, a subtle shift occurred in the air. This time, it was more pronounced, a tangible pressure that raised the hairs on the back of Kaelen's neck. He didn't consciously initiate the void stitch. The shift happened spontaneously, a reaction to the threat, an instinctual defense. The air around Sterling solidified, not violently, but with an unnerving precision. It wasn't a physical attack, but a paralysis of the mind, a momentary disruption of his neural pathways. Sterling froze mid-step, his face contorted in confusion, and a fleeting sense of disorientation. The guards, seeing their leader immobilized, hesitated, their weapons raised in uncertain apprehension. Kaelen's movements were swift and controlled. He didn't attack. Instead, he used the void stitch to subtly manipulate the environment. A slight shift in the angle of a security camera, a barely perceptible vibration in the floor that made the guard's footing unstable, a surge of cold air that momentarily obscured Sterling's vision. It wasn't about inflicting harm, but about creating a situation that rendered Sterling vulnerable. Before Sterling could regain his composure, Kaelen was gone, melting into the shadows of the server room, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and a stunned silence. The guards, disoriented and unsure, reported a technical malfunction to security. Sterling, after a furious, bewildered rant, was given a sedative and carried out by his security detail. As Kaelen quietly cleaned the last traces of the incident, he found Elara watching him, her eyes filled with a profound understanding. You used it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You used the void stitch." Kaelen simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "The universe always provides a solution," he said, turning to leave. "Sometimes it just needs a little persuasion." The rain continued to fall, washing away the echoes of his power, but the seed of revelation had been planted, a silent promise of the formidable warrior hidden beneath the guise of a janitor. Chapter 3. The Jade Echo. The following days were a carefully orchestrated ballet of observation and subtle influence. Kaelen, still ostensibly the night shift janitor, meticulously catalogued the responses of the Vane Syndicate's personal guard, specifically Commander Zhao, Sterling's right-hand man. Zhao, a man carved from granite and habit, was a devotee of the iron fist style, a brutal, direct martial art prioritizing raw power and overwhelming force. He represented everything Kaelen had sought to escape. Yet, the incident at the summit had clearly rattled him, replacing arrogance with a cautious, almost hunted, alertness. He spent hours reviewing security footage grainy, static-filled images of the server room, analyzing the subtle shifts, the momentary disorientation. Kaelen wasn't interested in brute force, he was dissecting the mechanics of control. Elara, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of frantic activity. She had spent the intervening days locked in the firm's deepest archives, combing through schematics, historical records, and even discarded blueprints of the building itself. The Vane Mining Syndicate had been involved in this site's construction nearly a century ago, a secret contingency plan woven into the foundation itself. Sterling, in his furious attempt to understand what happened, had ordered a complete lockdown and a thorough forensic investigation, which predictably yielded nothing but bureaucratic red tape and the vague conclusion of a localized electromagnetic anomaly. Elara, however, was hunting for something more tangible, something that linked the obsidian stylus to the inexplicable events. She discovered a series of coded diagrams tucked away in a forgotten section, belonging to a long-dead engineer named Silas Blackwood. Blackwood, a recluse obsessed with vibrational energy and harmonious disruption, had apparently conducted secret experiments utilizing a similar technique, a process he termed jade echoing. It's not about directly manipulating dark matter, Kaelen, she explained one evening, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard, translating Blackwood's archaic notations. It's about amplifying and redirecting existing vibrational frequencies. Think of it like tuning a musical instrument. The obsidian needle isn't creating the void, it's channeling a naturally occurring resonance and subtly shifting it to shatter the structure of an opponent's equilibrium. Kaelen listened intently, observing the way Alara's eyes lit up with intellectual fervor. He recognized the brilliance she possessed, a focus honed by years of suppression, and realized that his strategy wasn't just about neutralizing threats, but about fostering this latent talent. He began to subtly guide her, feeding her fragments of information gleaned from his own training, the concept of flow, the ability to anticipate an opponent's movements by sensing their internal vibrations, a skill that could be adapted to the manipulation of energy. The next meeting with Commander Zhao occurred in the grand ballroom, now meticulously cleaned and fortified. Zhao, a towering figure in dark armor, remained visibly unnerved. He had reviewed the footage repeatedly, demanding explanations from the security team, but the only consistent factor was Kaelen's vanishing act. "You are a phantom, Vane," Zhao stated, his voice a low rumble. "A ghost in the machine. You possess a power that shouldn't exist, a skill that defies logic." Kaelen, sipping a cup of jasmine tea, a gesture had learned from Alara, simply replied, "Logic is often a convenient fiction, Commander. Sometimes, the most effective solutions lie outside the realm of rational thought." He subtly activated the void stitch, not to attack, but to assess Zhao's readiness. He detected a faint tremor in the commander's musculature, a subconscious anticipation of danger. A barely perceptible vibration rippled through the polished marble floor, causing Zhao to instinctively shift his weight, momentarily disrupting his stance. "You are aware of your own vulnerability, aren't you, Commander?" Kaelen asked, his voice low and measured. "Your reflexes are quicker, your strength greater. Yet, you are still bound by the limitations of your physical form." Suddenly, a section of the ballroom's opulent wallpaper, a vast tapestry depicting ancient dragons, began to ripple. Not a violent tearing, but a subtle distortion, a visual echo of the vibrations Kaelen was generating. The effect was unsettling, disorienting. Zhao, already on edge, stumbled backward, momentarily losing his balance. What is this?" he stammered, grasping for support. Kaelen didn't answer. He had not directly harmed Zhao, but he had exploited a fundamental vulnerability, the fragility of the senses. He let the effect subside, leaving Zhao blinking, confused, and acutely aware of the unseen forces at play. As Kaelen walked away, he found Alara waiting near the grand staircase, a small, exquisitely crafted jade pendant clutched in her hand. "Blackwood's theory suggests the pendant will act as an amplifier," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "A focal point for channeling the jade echo. I've recalibrated it. It's responding to you, Kaelen." The pendant pulsed with a faint green light, mirroring the subtle energy of the void stitch. The seed of revelation had blossomed, and Kaelen knew with absolute certainty that the game had truly begun. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Void. The air in the Vane Syndicate's newly acquired headquarters hummed with a nervous energy. Kaelen, now seated at a polished obsidian desk overlooking the sprawling city, was meticulously reviewing schematics for a new quantum computing project. The shift in power was palpable, yet he moved with a quiet, almost meditative focus, acutely aware of the watchful eyes and thinly veiled suspicion of his newly assembled security detail. Among them was Commander Zhao, still visibly shaken from his earlier encounter, his movements now noticeably more cautious. Alara, radiating a quiet confidence, stood beside him, the jade pendant, now nicknamed the Echo Stone, clutched in her hand. She had spent the last 72 hours immersed in Blackwood's research, a brilliant but eccentric 18th-century scholar obsessed with the resonant properties of jade and ancient martial techniques. Blackwood theorized that jade, particularly when meticulously shaped and imbued with specific vibrational patterns, could act as a conduit for channeling the raw power of what he termed the jade echo, a faint, almost subconscious echo of the void stitch. The sensors are indicating a fluctuating energy signature within the echo stone, Alara announced, her fingers dancing across a holographic display. It's amplifying Kaelen's resonance. The readings are strongest during periods of heightened focus, particularly when has manipulating even subconsciously the vibrations of the surrounding environment. Kaelen didn't interrupt. He was experimenting. Had spent the morning subtly altering the airflow in the room, adjusting the temperature with minute shifts in the climate control. And, most notably, he was subtly influencing the grain of the polished obsidian desk. He wasn't trying to force a reaction, merely observing the interplay between himself, the jade echo, and the meticulously engineered environment. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. One of the security guards, a hulking veteran named Lai, was staring fixedly at the mahogany paneling of the wall. He was clutching his head, a low groan escaping his lips. I feel it, Lee stammered, his eyes wide with a disconcerting blend of fear and exhilaration. A pressure. Like something trying to seep in. Kaelen immediately assessed the situation. Lee wasn't experiencing a physical ailment. The jade echo, amplified by the echo stone, was subtly disrupting Li's neurological pathways, creating a momentary opening for the void stitch. It wasn't a full-blown paralysis, not yet. It was a testing ground, a controlled introduction to the immense potential of his power. "Commander, maintain your composure," Kaelen instructed, his voice calm but firm. "Focus on your breathing. Ground yourself." He activated a small, intricate device on his wrist, a modified acupuncture needle system designed to modulate his own energy flow. The subtle vibration it produced helped to stabilize Li's disrupted neural pathways, gently guiding him back to equilibrium. As Lee regained his composure, a low chuckle echoed through the room. Director Sterling, summoned by Kaelen's security detail, stood in the doorway, flanked by two heavily armed guards. He hadn't bothered to hide his contempt. "So, the janitor has been experimenting with toys," he sneered. "Impressive, I suppose. But toys nonetheless. You can't harness the power of the void stitch, boy. It's a myth. A fairy tale." Kaelen remained impassive. He allowed Alara to activate the echo stone. As the jade pendant pulsed with an intensified green light, a visible ripple spread outwards from it, distorting the light and air in a miniature version of the effect Zhao had experienced. This time, however, the distortion wasn't just visual. Sterling, caught in the expanding field, froze mid-sentence. His face contorted in a mask of primal fear. He gasped, clutching at his chest, his body rigid. Kaelen didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. The amplified energy of the echo stone, channeled through his presence, was enough. The very air around Sterling began to solidify, forming a shimmering obsidian cage that restrained him. "You misunderstand," Kaelen said, his voice resonating with an ancient power. "The void stitch isn't a myth. It's a fundamental aspect of reality, and I am merely adjusting the balance." Zhao, recovering quickly, instinctively drew his energy blade. But before he could react, Kaelen subtly shifted his weight, initiating a micro-movement, a shift in his stance that disrupted Zhao's balance just enough to momentarily throw him off his footing. Another subtle shift, and Zhao's blade sparked against the obsidian floor, shattering harmlessly. "Your reflexes are impressive, Commander," Kaelen observed, his eyes radiating an unnerving intelligence. "But you're still fighting a shadow. The true strength lies not in brute force, but in understanding the nature of the void itself." Alara, analyzing the data streaming from the echo stone, added, "The amplification isn't just a defensive measure, Kaelen. It's a key. By manipulating the jade echo, you can subtly influence the very fabric of space and time. The potential, it's staggering. Kaelen knew she was right. The game had truly begun, and he was just beginning to learn the rules. The whispers of the Void Stitch, once a secret locked within his bloodline, were now echoing through the corridors of the Vane Syndicate, and he intended to wield them with devastating precision. Chapter 5. The Jade Resonance. The immediate aftermath of the summit was a whirlwind of frantic investigation and bewildered pronouncements. Global security forces, alerted by the chaotic disruption, swarmed the Vane Tech building, analyzing the scene for traces of the corporate saboteurs, and more importantly, the impossible technique displayed by Kaelen. The fragmented obsidian shards, dubbed void markers by the bewildered analysts, were treated as potentially hazardous remnants of an unknown weapon. The whispers surrounding Kaelen the Janitor, the anomaly, a phantom, grew into a roaring tide of speculation. Meanwhile, Kaelen, operating under the guise of resuming his custodial duties, was subtly manipulating the situation. Had instructed his security team, a handful of quietly trained specialists recruited from the Vane Syndicate's less publicized assets, to maintain a low profile, feeding the authorities carefully curated misinformation about a rogue security system malfunction. It was a classic play, layering deception upon deception. Elara, meanwhile, was a hive of frantic activity, meticulously analyzing the Echo Stone, a sophisticated piece of quantum computing hardware that had been inexplicably amplified by Kaelen's sudden demonstration. The stone's readings were baffling, displaying complex ripples in the space-time continuum, fluctuating energy signatures that defied conventional physics. She had even managed to isolate a small section of the data, displaying it on a holographic projection in her new laboratory, a space carved out of a previously unused server room, now filled with the scent of sandalwood and the gentle hum of advanced technology. "The key isn't just containment, Kaelen," she said, her fingers dancing across a control panel, manipulating the holographic display. "The Jade Echo isn't merely an amplifier. It's a resonant chamber. When you utilize the Void Stitch, you're not just disrupting the nervous system, you're creating a cascade of vibrational resonance. Think of it like striking a tuning fork, but instead of sound, you're manipulating dark matter at a quantum level." Kaelen, observing her work, leaned against a workbench, his expression unreadable. "You've grasped the core concept remarkably quickly, Elara. The Vane family's archives contained fragments of this knowledge, centuries old. Our ancestors understood the principle, but it was always treated as a dangerous legacy, a power too volatile to be wielded openly." Suddenly, a rhythmic chime echoed through the laboratory. The Jade Echo, previously displaying erratic patterns, stabilized, resolving into a complex, pulsating waveform. "The amplification is stabilizing," Elara exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. "The resonance is amplifying exponentially. With this level of control, Kaelen, we could potentially map the flows of dark matter across the entire planet." Before Kaelen could respond, a shadow fell across the doorway. Commander Zhao, his face grim, entered, accompanied by two heavily armed security officers. "Chairman Vane," he stated, his voice clipped and professional, "we've received a new transmission. The Global Defense Council wants a direct confrontation. They've identified the void markers and believe they represent a significant threat to global stability." Kaelen remained impassive. "Let them come," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I've anticipated this." He turned his gaze to the Echo Stone. "Activate the resonance cascade, Elara. Let's show them what a subtle shift can achieve." Elara initiated the sequence, adjusting the settings on the Echo Stone with practiced precision. The room filled with a low, almost subsonic hum. The Jade Echo pulsed with an ethereal blue light, growing brighter with each passing moment. As the resonance intensified, the air around Kaelen shimmered, thickening with an almost palpable energy. Zhao, anticipating a hostile attack, drew his energy blade, his movements precise and controlled. But as he brought the blade forward, he faltered, not from an attack, but from something far more unsettling. A wave of disorientation washed over him, a profound sense of unease. He stumbled, clutching at his head, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. What is happening?" he stammered, his eyes wide with confusion. Kaelen stepped forward, his hand outstretched. It wasn't a strike, but a gesture, a subtle modulation of the growing resonance. The air around Zhao solidified, not as a cage, but as a shimmering iridescent veil, an intricate tapestry woven from the manipulated dark matter. It wasn't restrictive, but profoundly disorienting, disrupting his perception, his balance, his very sense of self. "You perceive reality through vibrations, Commander," Kaelen said, his voice imbued with an unnerving authority. "I'm simply altering the dominant frequency. For a moment, you're experiencing a world outside of your own." Zhao, struggling against the intensifying effect, dropped his blade with a clang. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. The Void Stitch, it's not just a weapon. It's a weapon against thought itself. As quickly as it had begun, the effect subsided. Zhao collapsed to his knees, momentarily stunned. Kaelen, with a swift, precise movement, neutralized the remaining security officers, not with force, but by subtly disrupting their neural rhythms. Looking at Heir, a flicker of something akin to amusement crossed his face. "The council will arrive soon," he said. "Let them be prepared to witness the true power of the Void Stitch. Let them understand that some echoes, once awakened, cannot be silenced." Chapter 6. The Jade Mirror. The air in the newly christened Nexus Kaelen's private training chamber, built within the heart of the Vane Syndicate's burgeoning tech division, thrummed with an almost palpable energy. It was a space deliberately designed to amplify the Void Stitch, a circular room constructed of polished obsidian and layered with intricate jade screens. The dominant scent was sandalwood, a carefully cultivated fragrance designed to sharpen focus and dampen extraneous sensory input. Heir, meticulously documenting the spatial frequencies with a custom-built scanner, adjusted a holographic projection of the room's energy field, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The resonance is chaotic," she stated, tapping a stylus against her tablet. "The obsidian is acting as a focal point, certainly, but the constant influx of data from the city, the traffic, the communications, the residual anxieties of the workforce, it's a deluge. It's actively attempting to corrupt the flow." Kaelen remained motionless, his posture perfect, a stark contrast to the frantic activity around him. He was clad in a simple gray tunic, the only concession to his true identity. The tattered janitor's uniform was a carefully cultivated illusion, a shield against suspicion. The key, Heir, isn't suppression. It's control. You're trying to create a sterile environment. We need to guide the chaos, to refine it, to shape it into a weapon. He moved, not with a deliberate step, but with a flowing, almost liquid motion, initiating a subtle manipulation of the air around him. The jade screens shimmered, the projected holographic field pulsed with a brighter intensity. "You're layering frequencies?" Heir asked, her voice hushed with awe. "It's like a musical scale, but with dark matter." "Precisely," Kaelen replied, his gaze distant, as if communing with something beyond their comprehension. "The Void Stitch isn't about brute force. It's about understanding the underlying structure of reality, the vibrations that hold everything together. When applied correctly, it can disrupt those vibrations, paralyzing the target, not just physically, but mentally. A momentary severance from their perception of self." Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the Nexus, not from machinery, but from within Kaelen himself. The iridescent veil had created around the training room intensified, expanding outwards, distorting the reflections in the obsidian walls. The scanners began to scream, their data streams overloading. Kaelen. The feedback is overwhelming, Elara shouted, scrambling to recalibrate her instruments. The energy signature is spiking exponentially. It's feeding on itself. Kaelen didn't react with alarm. Instead, he closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath, his movements becoming even more fluid, more precise. He was no longer simply manipulating the air, he was actively harmonizing with it, absorbing the chaotic resonance, weaving it into a coherent pattern. His face, usually guarded, softened with an expression of serene concentration. "The council has been observing," he said, his voice calm amidst the rising storm. "They've begun to understand. They recognize the potential, the terrifying elegance of the void stitch." A section of the obsidian wall dissolved, revealing a group of figures standing in the doorway. They were members of the Celestial Order, ancient guardians of the martial arts, known for their unparalleled mastery of void stitch techniques, and for their unwavering skepticism towards its use. Their faces were stern, their eyes radiating a cold, ancient power. Leading them was Master Jian, a venerable warrior renowned for his mastery of the silent strike, a technique rumored to strip a man of his memories. "Vane," Master Jian said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the room. "We've witnessed your demonstration. Your control is impressive. However, it is also dangerously uncontrolled." Kaelen opened his eyes, meeting Master Jian's gaze unflinchingly. "Control is a matter of perspective, Master. You seek to suppress the void. I seek to harness its potential." Before Master Jian could respond, a shimmering iridescent projection materialized before them, a perfect replica of the Nexus, captured in real time. Within the projection, Kaelen moved with impossible speed, executing a series of maneuvers that shattered the holographic walls, scattering shards of light like a violent storm. The projection then collapsed, leaving the room silent once more. "The void stitch is not a toy, Vane," Master Jian said, his voice laced with warning. "It is a reflection of the deepest darkness within humanity. To wield it effectively, one must be utterly devoid of emotion, utterly detached from morality. You, however, carry a shard of empathy. A weakness." Kaelen smiled, a genuine, unsettling expression. "Perhaps," he said, his hand extending, the air around it shimmering with dark energy. "But sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in resisting the darkness, but in illuminating it." As he said the words, he executed a single, controlled gesture, the great void stroke. The jade screens in the room fractured, and a single perfectly formed obsidian needle, shimmering with dark matter, floated into his hand. "Let us see if you truly understand, Master," he said, holding out the needle towards the assembled council members. "Let us see if you can comprehend the silence of a shattered mind." Chapter 7. The Echo of Shattered Minds. The silence following Kaelen's demonstration was thick, broken only by the low hum of the Nexus projectors and the sharp intake of breaths from the council members. Grand Chairman Zhao, a man carved from granite, and steeped in the tradition of the Obsidian Syndicate's brutal efficiency, was the first to speak. "Impressive, Vane. Borderline reckless. The potential of the Void Stitch unleashed its weapon unlike any I've ever encountered." His gaze, cold and assessing, settled on Elara, who stood rigid, clutching a datapad, her face pale. "And this protégé of yours?" Kaelen's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a carefully constructed facade, a polished stone designed to disarm. Elara Vane is a visionary. She possesses an intuitive understanding of complex systems that surpasses anything I've witnessed. She will be instrumental in developing new applications for the Void Stitch, applications that, I believe, could reshape our world. Master Jian remained impassive, a swirling vortex of disapproval contained within the lines of his aged face. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate and precise, examining the fractured jade screens with a practiced eye. The resonance, it's faint, but undeniably present. You have touched the heart of the void, Vane. But you've also left a scar. A disturbance in the flow. This technique, it demands a sacrifice. A complete surrender to the darkness. Kaelen allowed a flicker of something akin to amusement to cross his features. Sacrifice is a word often used by those who fear what they do not understand. I don't seek to destroy, Master. I seek to control. The void stitch isn't inherently evil, it's a force like any other. It can be used for creation or destruction, depending on the wielder's intent. He reached out, his hand still shimmering with residual dark energy, and gently picked up a small shard of one of the fractured screens. The shard pulsed faintly, mirroring the faint ripple of the void stitch's effect. You see, Master, the greatest battles aren't fought with brute force. They're fought in the shadows, with precision, with control. A single stroke can silence 1,000 armies. He paused, letting the implications of his words hang in the air. And sometimes, a single stroke can silence a mind. The council members exchanged nervous glances. The air in the chamber crackled with unspoken tension. Zhao, recognizing the subtle shift in power, barked an order. Secure the facility. Complete a full diagnostic scan. I want to know exactly what was affected by this demonstration. As the security forces moved to obey, Kaelen turned to Alara, his voice low and urgent. We need to understand what happened. The projections, the resonance, it felt intrusive, like something was trying to reach into our minds. Alara, still visibly shaken, nodded. I felt it too. A pressure, like a wave of cold washing over me. It was gone as quickly as it came, but I recognized the signature. It's similar to what I detected during the sabotage attempt at the lab. Kaelen's eyes narrowed. Sterling wasn't merely trying to steal the AI. He was attempting to disrupt the void stitch itself. He was probing for vulnerabilities. He was trying to weaponize my abilities. He clenched his fist, the dark energy around his hand intensifying. He was using the void stitch against us. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the chamber, followed by a shimmering distortion in the air. A single, spectral image coalesced before them. Director Sterling, or what remained of him. He wasn't physically present, but his consciousness, fractured and distorted by Kaelen's void stitch, hung suspended in the Nexus projection. His eyes were wide with a horrifying understanding, filled with a desperate, pleading terror. Don't use it, Sterling's voice, a digitized whisper, echoed through the chamber. It's not a weapon, it's a prison. A beautiful, terrifying prison. The void, it feeds on thought, on memory. It will consume you, Vane. It will consume her. Before anyone could react, Kaelen moved with blinding speed. He raised his hand, the obsidian needle pulsing with dark energy. He didn't aim for Sterling's spectral form. Instead, he focused the void stitch, not on a single point, but on the very space where Sterling's consciousness resided. The effect was immediate and devastating. The spectral image shattered, not with a violent explosion of light, but with a silent, horrifying disintegration. The air shimmered with a residual darkness, and a collective gasp swept through the council chamber. Master Jian's face was etched with grim satisfaction. Well done, Vane. You have demonstrated a mastery beyond my expectations. But remember, the void is a fickle master. It demands respect, but never obedience. Turning to Alara, Kaelen offered a rare, genuine smile. We need to learn more about Sterling's attempts. He wasn't just trying to steal the AI, he was trying to unlock the deepest secrets of the void stitch. And I suspect he wasn't alone. He paused, his gaze hardening. This isn't over, Alara. The shadows are stirring, and we must be prepared to meet them. Chapter 8, Echoes in the Jade. The obsidian stylus felt cool and strangely comforting in Kaelen's hand. The immediate aftermath of the summit had been a maelstrom of bewildered executives, panicked security teams, and the lingering scent of ozone and shattered ambition. The Vane Syndicate, ever efficient, had swiftly taken control, securing the lab and initiating a full forensic sweep. But Kaelen wasn't interested in bureaucratic reports. He needed to understand what Sterling had truly been after, and the Council's cryptic warnings hinted at something far deeper than corporate espionage. Master Jian, a wizened martial arts sage with eyes like polished jade, remained a constant, watchful presence. Head spent the last few hours meticulously examining the residual energy signatures clinging to the carbon fiber walls, confirming the almost impossible: the void stitch wasn't simply a combat technique. It was a manipulation of the fundamental fabric of existence. Sterling was dangerously close, Jan said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't just attempt to weaponize the void stitch, he sought to merge with it. He believed he could control its boundless potential, shaping it to his own twisted desires. He turned to Kaelen, his gaze piercing. The tremors you sensed, the fleeting glimpses of something else in the lab, those were echoes of his ambition, attempting to force a pathway through the boundaries. A path that, if opened, could unravel the very structure of reality. Kaelen spent the next 24 hours immersed in the lab's recovered data, Elara's assistance invaluable. She quickly deciphered Sterling's corrupted attempts to interface with the core AI, discovering a series of unsettling algorithms patterns of neural resonance that mirrored the void stitch's manipulation of dark matter. He found a hidden server, encrypted with a key Sterling himself had painstakingly crafted, and within it, a disturbing archive of esoteric texts, fragmented scrolls, detailing forgotten schools of void stitch practice, centuries older than the Vane lineage. He wasn't just stealing the AI, he was searching for lost techniques, Elara said, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. These scrolls, they describe a method of void anchoring, attempting to permanently bind a warrior's consciousness to the void. It's incredibly dangerous. The mind would be utterly consumed, a puppet for the void's will. As they delved deeper, a strange phenomenon began to occur. Kaelen experienced vivid, disorienting flashes, glimpses of a stark, obsidian landscape, dominated by towering structures of swirling dark energy. He saw himself, or a version of himself, engaged in combat with spectral figures, wielding the void stitch with devastating precision. These weren't memories, they were intrusions, echoes of Sterling's attempted connection bleeding into his own consciousness. Suddenly a sharp pain lanced through his head. He stumbled, clutching his temples, his vision blurring. Jian swiftly stepped forward, placing a calming hand on his arm. The void is resisting your intrusion, Vane. It senses your strength, your nascent control. It's attempting to pull you in. Insane things, Kaelen gasped, struggling to focus. Fragments of his efforts. He was attempting to create a nexus, a point where he could permanently connect to the void. He was building a prison, Jian stated grimly. And you, unknowingly, were providing the key. Then, a new development. As Kaelen focused his energy, attempting to filter out the intrusive visions, he noticed a subtle shift in the air, a faint, rhythmic pulse emanating from a seemingly ordinary jade sculpture on Elara's desk. It was a simple depiction of a coiled dragon, a common motif in ancient Chinese art, but something felt profoundly wrong about it. Elara, Kaelen said, his voice strained. This sculpture, it's not just a decoration. There's something active within it. As he spoke, the dragon's jade eyes began to glow with a faint, unsettling crimson light. The air shimmered, and a whisper, cold and devoid of emotion, filled the room. The void seeks balance before either Kaelen or Elara could react. The sculpture began to rotate, slowly at first, then, with increasing speed. A torrent of dark energy erupted from its open mouth, coalescing into a miniature void, a swirling vortex of obsidian blackness. Sterling didn't just seek to control the void, Jian exclaimed, drawing his own martial arts blade, a shimmering weapon forged from solidified dark matter. He attempted to seed it. This sculpture, it was a conduit, a dormant node designed to amplify and accelerate the void's influence. He intended to use it to launch a global campaign of destabilization, to shatter reality itself. The fight had begun. The echoes of Sterling's ambition had manifested not as a ghost, but as a tangible, terrifying force. And Kaelen, the Rich's ancient heir, stood ready to meet it, armed with the void stitch and a growing understanding of the true, terrifying potential of the prison he had been born into. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Shattered Seal. The crimson glow of the miniature void pulsed with a sickening rhythm, mirroring the frantic beat of Kaelen's heart. Elara, surprisingly calm despite the chaos, was already analyzing the energy signature with a handheld scanner, its holographic display flickering with complex waveforms. Jian, a veteran of the Silent Fist clan, a martial arts order dedicated to controlling and channeling void energies, moved with a terrifying grace, deflecting the tendrils of dark energy that snaked out from the sculpture with precise, calculated strikes. "The sculpture isn't merely a conduit, it's a fractured seal," Elara announced, her voice strained but focused. Sterling wasn't seeding the void, he was reopening a wound. This dragon, it wasn't designed to amplify, but to contain. He deliberately corrupted the runes etched into its base, creating a feedback loop, a desperate attempt to weaponize chaos itself. Kaelen realized the horrifying truth. Sterling hadn't been driven by simple ambition, had been operating on a level of esoteric madness, attempting to unlock a power he didn't understand and couldn't control. The obsidian-tipped stylus had instinctively grabbed from the floor felt suddenly inadequate, a crude tool against a force that had slumbered for millennia. He focused, drawing upon the void stitch. The familiar sensation, a tingling pressure behind his eyes, a subtle shift in the air density around him intensified. He visualized the miniature void, not as a destructive force, but as a tangled knot of dark matter. He began to stitch, not with forceful pressure, but with delicate, almost surgical precision, carefully manipulating the microscopic vibrations. "He's trying to isolate the core instability," Jian shouted, expertly intercepting a particularly violent surge of energy that threatened to overwhelm Elara. "It's a dangerous technique, Kaelen. You risk amplifying the damage." Kaelen ignored him, his concentration absolute. He wasn't just disrupting the flow of dark energy, he was subtly reshaping it, reforming the fractured runes on the dragon's base, attempting to restore the seal's original integrity. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his muscles screamed with the effort. The crimson glow of the void pulsed erratically, reacting to his actions, battling his attempts to contain it. Suddenly, a wave of intense pain shot through him, originating from the sculpture itself. It felt like an ancient, suffocating pressure, a millennia-old sorrow manifesting as physical agony. He staggered back, nearly losing his footing, and the miniature void expanded momentarily, threatening to engulf the room. "The sculpture is resisting," Elara yelled, adjusting her scanner. Sterling imprinted his will upon it, forging a parasitic connection. "We need to sever it completely." Jian, without hesitation, charged forward, launching a series of devastating strikes aimed at the sculpture's core. Each blow was infused with void energy, but the dragon seemed to anticipate his attacks, deflecting them with an unnatural agility. Kaelen knew Jian's approach was reckless, too reliant on brute force. He needed a different tactic. Focusing his mind, he shifted his technique, abandoning the painstaking act of restoration and embracing the void stitch raw potential. He visualized the air itself, not as a medium for stitching, but as a weapon. With a controlled exhale, he executed the silent fracture, a technique he had instinctively honed during his time as a janitor, honed by years of subtly manipulating the chaotic energy of the server room. The air around him solidified, not into a physical force, but into a field of concentrated vibration, a silent, invisible lattice. This time, instead of pinning the void, he used it. The silent fracture didn't disrupt the miniature vortex that contained it. encapsulating it within a self-sustaining bubble of compressed dark matter. The crimson glow intensified, but the expansion ceased. The miniature void, once a raging storm, was now a contained sphere of terrifying beauty. "By the void!" Jian gasped, momentarily stunned. You've caged it." As Kaelen maintained the silent fracture, he felt a strange resonance within the sculpture. A sense of release. The crimson glow faded, and the whispers ceased. Slowly, the dragon's jade eyes dimmed, returning to a dull, lifeless gray. "The seal is restored," Elara confirmed, her scanner registering a significant decrease in the disruptive energy signature. "But it's weak. Sterling's actions have left lingering traces. We need to reinforce it." Kaelen looked down at the now inert sculpture. He realized then that this wasn't just about containing chaos, it was about understanding it. Sterling hadn't just sought to exploit the void, had sought to understand it, a dangerous pursuit that had ultimately led to his downfall. And Kaelen, the Rich's ancient heir, was beginning to suspect that the true power of the Void Stitch wasn't simply about destruction, but about balance, about guiding the chaotic currents of existence. Chapter 10. The resonance of control, the sterile white of the lab, hummed with a low thrum of the stabilization matrix, a device Elara and her team had frantically constructed after the silent fracture. Dust motes danced in the crimson afterglow that still clung to the jade dragon, a grim reminder of the near catastrophe. Kaelen, leaning against a workstation, observed the intricate patterns of energy displayed on the holographic projection, a complex web of concentric circles, pulsing with a soft, insistent rhythm. The matrix is holding, but the energy signature is erratic. Jian, the team's lead physicist, reported, his brow furrowed with concentration. Sterling's meddling amplified the inherent instability of the void. "It's like throwing fuel onto a flickering flame." Kaelen nodded slowly. The dragon, he realized, wasn't simply a vessel for the Void Stitch, it was a key. A key meticulously crafted over centuries by the Vane lineage, designed to harness and control, not merely contain, the chaotic energies. Sterling, in his frantic attempts to dissect and replicate the technique, hadn't been a fool, had been a desperate, flawed echo of a forgotten art. "Elara, how's the resonance analysis?" Kaelen asked, turning to the junior coder who had become his unexpected confidant. Elara tapped rapidly at her console, her fingers moving with an almost preternatural speed. The core signature shifting subtly. It's responding to the matrix, attempting to reassert itself. But it's hesitant, almost like it's remembering something it shouldn't. A prickle of unease ran down Kaelen's spine. The dragon wasn't just a relic. It was a sentient echo of power, a consciousness bound to the Void Stitch. His father, the Grand Chairman, had been hesitant to explain the true nature of the art, claiming it was a tool for righteous justice, not a weapon for petty grievances. Kaelen was beginning to understand that righteous justice demanded more than just suppression. It demanded understanding, control, and above all, respect. "We need to strengthen the seal," Kaelen said, his voice low and deliberate. "Not with brute force, but with focused resonance." He stepped forward, his hands moving in a series of fluid, almost imperceptible gestures. The air around him shimmered, not with the aggressive crimson of the void, but with a gentle, pulsating blue, the color of the Void Stitch stabilizing energy. He wasn't activating the Void Stitch, not in the traditional sense. Instead, he was subtly modulating the resonance of the matrix, feeding it a carefully crafted harmonic vibration, a song designed to reinforce the dragon's seal. It was a technique Head practiced instinctively, honed over years of repressed training, a primal understanding of energy flow. "What are you doing, Kaelen?" Jian asked, his voice laced with both apprehension and fascination. "You're not weaving? That's an incredibly delicate technique. It's theorized to be lost for centuries." Kaelen ignored the question, his focus entirely on the dragon. As he continued to manipulate the energy flow, the holographic projection shifted, displaying a series of cascading waveforms, a visual representation of the resonance he was creating. The erratic pulses began to slow. The crimson glow stabilized, and the whisper's faint, ghostly echoes of the dragon's imprisoned essence ceased entirely. "The signature is stabilizing," Elara confirmed, her eyes wide with astonishment. "The matrix is amplifying your resonance, creating a positive feedback loop. It's remarkable." Suddenly, a deep resonant hum filled the lab, vibrating through the floor and into Kaelen's bones. The jade dragon's eyes, previously dull gray, flickered with a faint internal light. A single iridescent scale shimmered, then slowly rotated, as if considering something. "It's responding," Jian gasped, frantically adjusting his scanner. "The energy signature is shifting again, but this time it's focused, as if it's testing the boundaries of the seal." Kaelen realized with a chilling certainty that the dragon wasn't merely responding, it was learning. The silent fracture hadn't just contained the void, it had ignited a spark of awareness within the ancient artifact. He paused his manipulation, his breath held. He understood now. The true power of the Void Stitch wasn't simply in its ability to paralyze or destroy, but in its potential to influence, to gently guide the chaotic currents of existence, to subtly nudge the balance between order and chaos. "Elara," he said, his voice firm, "adjust the matrix. Increase the harmonic frequency by 3%. Let's see if we can establish a genuine dialogue." As Elara implemented his command, the dragon's eyes glowed with a vibrant, sapphire light. A single, perfectly formed drop of water condensed from the air and landed on the dragon's snout, disappearing in a shimmer of light. In detecting a shift in the ambient energy, Jian reported, his voice hushed. "It's subtle, but it's there. The dragon is communicating." Kaelen stood before the jade dragon, the heir to a forgotten legacy, a master of the Void Stitch, and a janitor by trade. He was no longer just guarding a relic, he was engaged in a conversation with the very essence of chaos. And he realized, with a surge of both trepidation and exhilaration, that his journey had just begun. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Loom. The following days were a dizzying blend of meticulous calibration and unnerving revelations. Elara, initially skeptical, became a fervent believer in Kaelen's approach. Her coding skills now focused on amplifying the dragon's nascent communication. Jian, a retired physicist specializing in temporal anomalies, monitored the data streams with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The dragon, christened Silas by Elara, wasn't just responding, it was remembering. Fragments of ancient battles, technological advancements, even snippets of human emotion, all filtered through millennia of chaotic resonance pulsed from Silas' core. "The dragon exhibiting patterns linked to the fall of the Azure dynasty," Jian announced, his brow furrowed as he stared at a holographic projection of Silas' energy signature. Specifically, the deployment of the Weaver's chains. "It's grieving, Kaelen. The memory of that annihilation is profoundly imprinted." Kaelen felt a prickle of unease. The Weaver's chains were legendary, a weapon of pure vibrational disruption, capable of unraveling matter at a subatomic level, a technique lost to time. Silas, bound to this artifact, wasn't just a repository of knowledge. He was a living echo of a catastrophic event. "Increase the dampening field," he instructed, his movements deliberate. "We need to shield it from further intrusive stimuli." Elara analyzes the specific harmonic resonance associated with the Weaver's chains. "Let's understand what triggered this sorrow." Elara, working with a focused intensity, began to isolate the frequency, weaving intricate algorithms to dissect the chaotic data stream. The lab, normally a hive of technological activity, fell into a strange, almost reverent silence. Even Jian seemed to move with a newfound caution, acutely aware of the power they were wielding. Suddenly, Silas shifted. The sapphire light in his eyes intensified, and a series of images flashed across the projection, a vast obsidian-covered battlefield. Warriors clad in shimmering armor, and a towering mechanical construct, a weaver's engine tearing through the ranks with devastating efficiency. "It's not a static memory," Elara gasped, frantically adjusting her controls. It's active. Silas is reconstructing the events." Then, a voice, ancient and resonant, echoed within the lab, not through speakers, but directly within their minds. It wasn't a language, not precisely. It was a feeling, a torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion, terror, loss, and a profound, chilling understanding of the destructive potential of absolute control. "Beware the loom," the voice resonated, a single, chilling phrase. "For to unravel is to destroy, and to rebuild is to enslave." The projection dissolved, leaving them shaken. "The void stitch, it's reacting to this," Kaelen observed, his face pale. "Silas isn't merely communicating, has projecting a warning. A warning about the nature of power itself." He reached out, not with his hands, but with the subtle manipulation of the void stitch. A faint shimmer emanated from his fingertips, a barely perceptible distortion of the air. He targeted the harmonic frequency emanating from Silas, attempting to establish a deeper, more controlled connection. "Silas," he spoke, his voice low and measured, "we do not seek to destroy. We seek to understand, to learn from the past." This time, the response was different. The sapphire light softened, and an image coalesced, a complex geometric pattern, shimmering with an intricate energy field. "This," Gian whispered, his eyes wide with understanding, "is a schematic. A diagram of the weaver's engine. But it's incomplete." Kaelen realized with a sickening lurch. Silas wasn't just offering a warning, he was actively guiding them, attempting to fill in the gaps in the lost knowledge. But he was also subtly, almost imperceptibly, demonstrating the fundamental principles of the weavers, chains, the delicate balance between creation and destruction, order and chaos. As he focused his will, attempting to grasp the intricacies of the schematic, he felt a surge of energy, a jarring ripple within the void stitch. It was as if Silas was testing him, probing the limits of his control, assessing his intentions. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A tremor rippled through the building, accompanied by a deep, resonant hum. The holographic projection flickered violently, displaying a horrifying image: a young boy, no older than 10, meticulously constructing a miniature weaver's engine out of polished obsidian and intricate gears. Then, the voice returned, now laced with an overwhelming sadness. "The cycle, it begins anew." Before Kaelen could react, the energy signature shifted, becoming intensely focused, and a wave of icy paralysis surged outwards, not targeting them directly, but enveloping the entire lab. He instinctively activated the void stitch, a silent, precise execution of the great void stroke. The air solidified, pinning the frozen equipment, the stunned technicians, and even Gian, in an invisible cage of dark matter energy. As the paralysis subsided, he looked at Elara, her face etched with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Silas," he said, his voice laced with a profound sense of urgency, "You've shown us the danger. Now, we must learn to control it." The echoes of the loom, he realized, were not just warning them of a forgotten catastrophe. They were a reflection of their own potential for destruction, a chilling reminder that even the purest of intentions could be corrupted by the allure of absolute power. Chapter 12. The Echo of Stone. The metallic tang of ozone hung heavy in the air, a lingering consequence of the void stitch activation. The lab, once a hive of frantic innovation, now resembled a meticulously preserved tableau of frozen chaos. Server racks stood suspended mid-operation. Holographic projections shimmered with captured light, and the technicians, including the perpetually smirking Gian, were encased in shimmering, obsidian-gray prisons, their limbs locked in impossible angles. Elara, however, was anything but frozen. Her eyes, wide and alight with a dangerous curiosity, were fixed on Kaelen. She took tentative steps towards him, circling the epicenter of the event like a cautious predator. What was that? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the low hum emanating from the solidified air. Kaelen remained motionless, his hands subtly flexing, the faint vibration of the void stitch still thrumming beneath his skin. Silas was testing me, he said, his voice carefully neutral. He was probing the raw potential of the void stitch, attempting to gauge my resolve. The tremor, the projection, they weren't random occurrences. They were designed to force a confrontation, to see if I would succumb to the echo of the loom. He gestured to the frozen technicians. The paralysis wasn't meant to harm, merely to observe. A controlled demonstration of the void stitch's full capabilities. Elara, a whirlwind of coding fuel deduction, was already examining the scene. She knelt beside a frozen console, carefully tracing the solidified patterns of energy with a gloved hand. The energy signature, she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's layered, not just a singular application of the void stitch. It's as if Silas was layering multiple threads of the loom's resonance, creating a complex, almost architectural pattern. Kaelen observed her, a flicker of something akin to respect crossing his features. Had underestimated her intelligence. The junior coder, the girl who spent her nights explaining binary code, was unraveling the intricacies of a martial art that had shaped empires and nearly destroyed the world. The loom, he said, carefully choosing his words, isn't merely a weapon. It's a conduit, a way to access echoes of the past, to draw upon the raw, untamed energy of creation and destruction. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the frozen tableau. Silas wasn't trying to harm us, he was trying to teach us. Suddenly, the air shimmered again, and a new holographic projection sprang to life, clearer and more stable than the previous one. This time, it wasn't a terrifying image, but a close-up of the miniature weaver's engine that Silas had shown him. As he watched, the engine, impossibly, began to shift and rotate, the obsidian gears whirring with a ghostly motion. It was a breathtaking display of miniature engineering, a testament to a skill that transcended time. This is it, Kaelen realized, a chilling comprehension dawning upon him. Silas wasn't simply a warrior. He was a keeper of the loom, a guardian tasked with preventing the echoes from overwhelming us. He turned to Elara, his expression grave. The tremors, the voice, the projection, they weren't random. They were attempts to trigger the loom's resonance. Silas was attempting to awaken it, to draw us into the cycle. Just then, Gian, his limbs still encased in the dark matter prison, let out a choked gasp. The frozen air around him shifted slightly, and he began to twitch violently. Hez resisting, Kaelen said, his movements swift and precise. He focused his energy, extending the void stitch influence, tightening the invisible cage around Gian's body. We need to understand why he was resisting. Silas wasn't trying to destroy us. He was trying to show us the fragility of our own control. As he spoke, a new, unsettling detail emerged. The obsidian-tipped stylus, the one Head instinctively picked up at the Global Tech Summit, was now emitting a faint, pulsing light. The air around it shimmered with a darker, almost viscous energy the color of deep night. He realized, with a sudden chilling certainty, that the stylus wasn't merely a tool for channeling the void stitch. It was an amplifier, a conduit for the loom's raw, untamed power. The stylus, he said, his voice strained, it's not just a weapon. It's a key to unlocking the loom's full potential. Silas wasn't just testing me. He was testing you as well, Elara. He was seeing if you could understand the true nature of this power, a power that could both create and destroy, build and obliterate. The voice of Silas echoed in his mind, no longer sad, but filled with a profound, terrifying urgency. The cycle, it begins anew. The weaver must be awakened. The balance must be restored. Kaelen looked at Elara, at the shimmering, frozen scene, at the pulsing stylus in his hand. He knew, with a growing dread, that their quiet existence as a janitor and a coder was over. The echoes of the loom had chosen them, and their journey into the heart of ancient power had just begun. Chapter 13. The jade serpents coil the air in Kaelen's newly established laboratory, felt thick with anticipation, a humid stillness punctuated by the gentle hum of the stylus. It pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, the viscous black light intensifying subtly with each passing moment. Elara, normally a whirlwind of focused energy, moved with a hesitant grace, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the jade panels that lined the walls. She was trying to understand the data flooding her senses, readings from the stylus, fluctuations in the building's energy grid, even subtle shifts in the ambient temperature. "It's not just energy, Kaelen," she finally said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's resonance. The stylus is drawing on something deeper, something ancient. It's like tuning a massive instrument." Kaelen nodded, his gaze fixed on the stylus. He had spent the last 72 hours in a state of almost constant vigilance, pushing himself to understand the flow of the void stitch, amplified and focused through the obsidian tool. He experimented with small bursts of energy, sketching patterns in the air, spirals, geometric shapes, even simple depictions of stylized dragons, each manifestation accompanied by a ripple of solidified dark matter. "Silas was right," he murmured. "The loom isn't merely a technique. It's a dimensional thread, woven through reality itself. The void stitch is a way to manipulate its tension." Suddenly, the pulsing of the stylus escalated, the black light erupting in a brilliant flash. The jade panels throbbed with energy, and a serpentine pattern began to etch itself onto the wall, not carved, but formed, as if the jade itself was reshaping. From the center of the swirling pattern, a small, perfectly formed jade serpent, no larger than his hand, uncoiled and floated into the air. It moved with impossible fluidity, its scales shimmering with an internal light that mirrored the stylus. Elara gasped, stepping back instinctively. What is that?" "The weaver's echo," Kaelen replied, his voice low and controlled. Silas believed the loom would eventually manifest a physical representation of its power, a conduit to fully access its potential. The weaver is that conduit. As he spoke, the jade serpent began to writhe, its movements growing more complex, more deliberate. It looped and coiled, creating intricate patterns in the air that mirrored the initial sketches had made with the stylus. He realized, with a sickening comprehension, that he wasn't controlling the serpent, it was controlling him. The void stitch, amplified by the stylus, was flowing through him, not as a focused weapon, but as a torrent of raw, untamed power. "I need to break the connection," he commanded, struggling against the encroaching influence. He reached for the stylus, intending to sever the flow, but the serpent moved faster, a jade whirlwind encircling his hand. He felt a searing pain, not of physical damage, but of information, a deluge of sights, sounds, and emotions flooding his consciousness. Glimpses of ancient battles, forgotten civilizations, the ebb and flow of time itself. "It's feeding on your will," Elara shouted, desperately analyzing the data streams. "The loom, it's learning. It's adapting." He pulled his hand back, the serpent momentarily losing its coherence, shrinking back to its original miniature form. The stylus pulse subsided, and the oppressive sense of being observed lessened. But the connection wasn't broken. "It's subtly influencing my perceptions," Kaelen said, breathing heavily. "It's showing me possibilities, strategies, the flaws in my defenses." A chilling thought struck him. Silas hadn't just been testing him, he had been subtly guiding him, planting the seeds of the loom's influence within his mind. And now, the serpent was confirming it. The loom didn't want to be controlled, it wanted to be understood, to be integrated into its own grand design. "The Grand Chairman," he said, his voice strained, "is not just my father. Has a node in the loom's network." He activated the security systems of the Vane Syndicate building, initiating a full lockdown. He needed to isolate the laboratory, to contain the Weaver's echo, and analyze the data before the influence spread. But as he did, he noticed something else. The building's internal sensors, usually calibrated to detect intrusions, were now registering a pattern, a subtle, rhythmic fluctuation that coincided with the Jade Serpent's movements. "The entire building is resonating," Alara exclaimed, her fingers flying across her console. "The loom isn't just manipulating me, Kaelen. It's manipulating everything." The obsidian-tipped stylus glowed with a renewed intensity, projecting a beam of black light that struck the floor. The floor itself began to shimmer, the polished concrete dissolving into a swirling vortex of dark matter. Before either of them could react, a towering figure began to materialize from the vortex, a warrior clad in obsidian armor, wielding a weapon that resembled a miniature, pulsing void stitch, his eyes burning with an ancient, terrible knowledge. "Welcome, Weaver," the figure said, his voice a resonant echo that seemed to vibrate within their very bones. "The cycle is ending, and your role has only just begun." Chapter 14. Echoes of the Loom. The vortex stabilized, revealing a figure that seemed both utterly ancient and terrifyingly present. The warrior, whom Kaelen instinctively recognized as a manifestation of the loom itself, stood roughly 15 feet tall, his obsidian armor polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the chaotic swirl of dark matter still clinging to the floor. His weapon, the void stitch, pulsed with a cold, internal light, mimicking the tremor Kaelen had unleashed during the summit. This wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a meticulously crafted instrument of control, a delicate probe into the very fabric of reality. "Welcome, Weaver," the warrior, who introduced himself as Silas, said, his voice a resonant echo that seemed to vibrate within their very bones. "The cycle is ending, and your role has only just begun." Alara, despite her initial shock, was already analyzing the data streaming from her console. "The energy signature, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not just dark matter manipulation, it's a feedback loop, a resonance amplified by your void stitch ability. The building is acting as a conduit, channeling the loom's influence." Kaelen shifted, instinctively tightening his grip on the obsidian stylus. Silas' presence was overwhelming, not through brute force, but through a sense of profound, unsettling awareness. He felt not just seen, but measured, every flicker of his subconscious scrutinized by an eye that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. The Syndicate's personal guard arrived, alerted by the security breach, Grand Chairman Zhao explained, his face a mask of controlled fury. He approached Silas cautiously, bowing deeply. "We understand the significance of your arrival. We pledge our full cooperation in understanding the nature of this influence." Silas regarded Zhao with an unreadable expression. "Cooperation is a useful starting point. However, understand this, the loom does not seek control. It seeks understanding. Your family's actions, the Vane Mining Syndicate's relentless pursuit of resources, have disrupted the natural flow. You have become a node of imbalance." A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the building's now overloaded systems. Kaelen realized with a chilling clarity that he wasn't just facing his father, he was confronting a fundamental truth about his family's legacy, a legacy built on exploitation and a blatant disregard for the delicate balance of the world. Suddenly, the floor beneath Alara shimmered again, and a series of intricate, glowing glyphs appeared on the polished concrete. They weren't simply patterns, they were shifting, evolving, forming complex equations of energy and vibration. "The loom is communicating," Alara gasped, her fingers dancing across the console. It's not just manipulating me, it's trying to teach me. It's showing me the architecture of reality. Silas raised a hand, and the glyphs began to coalesce, forming a holographic projection of the building itself. But it wasn't a static image. The projection shifted, revealing layers of hidden energy currents, shimmering pathways of dark matter that crisscrossed the entire structure. The building, Silas said, his voice amplified, is a vessel. A fragile one, but still capable of containing the loom's influence. But the structural integrity is failing. The constant barrage of your activity, coupled with the Syndicate's industrial activity, has weakened the bonds between the physical and the ethereal. He turned his gaze to Kaelen. You possess the key to restoring the balance. The Void Stitch is not merely a weapon, young Heir. It is a tool for harmonization. But you must learn to wield it with respect, with an understanding of the profound responsibility that comes with manipulating the very fabric of existence. Kaelen felt a surge of resentment mingled with a burgeoning sense of dread. Had been so focused on punishing Director Sterling, on reclaiming his family's power, that had ignored the deeper implications of his abilities. Had treated the Void Stitch as a tool for retribution, not as a force for balance. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice laced with a raw urgency. Silas stepped closer, the pulsating Void Stitch in his hand casting an eerie glow. You must begin by understanding the source of the imbalance. Trace the flow of energy. Identify the points of disruption. And then, you must weave a new harmony. He paused, his eyes burning into Kaelen's. Begin with the loom's whisper. Listen closely. The world is revealing its secrets, but only to those who are willing to hear. As he spoke, the obsidian stylus in Kaelen's hand began to vibrate, mirroring the rhythmic fluctuations emanating from the building. The air around him thickened with dark matter, and the swirling vortex on the floor pulsed with an intensified light. Kaelen knew with a sickening certainty that he was standing at a crossroads. He could continue down the path of vengeance, fueled by resentment and a lust for power. Or he could embrace the daunting responsibility that lay before him, a responsibility to understand, to harmonize, and to ultimately fulfill the Weaver's echo. The fate of the Syndicate, and perhaps the world, rested on his ability to choose. Chapter 15. The loom's whisper, the scent of ozone and damp metal, clung to the air, a tangible manifestation of the chaotic energy now thrumming through the cybertech firm. Silas, his face etched with an unsettling calm, continued to guide Kaelen through the swirling vortex, the obsidian stylus a conduit for the Void Stitch's power. The rhythmic vibration wasn't just a sensation anymore. It was a language, a torrent of information attempting to coalesce into understanding. Kaelen felt a sharp, almost physical, tugging at his mind, a persistent whisper urging him to see. It's not about the saboteurs, Kaelen, Silas said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate from the foundations of the building. Sterling's actions were a symptom, not a disease. The disruption isn't localized. It's spreading. He pointed a slender finger at a section of the floor where the vortex was particularly intense. The core AI Chronos, it's not just data. It's a focal point, a node in a network of resonance that's decaying. Kaelen focused, pushing past the instinctive urge to strike out, to channel the Void Stitch's destructive potential. Instead, he let the stylus guide him, the vibrations intensifying as he moved closer to the vortex. Images flashed through his mind, not disjointed snippets, but coherent sequences the building's construction. A series of seismic tremors predating its existence, the deliberate placement of specific energy conduits, and, most disturbingly, a recurring symbol, a stylized spiderweb woven from dark matter, identical to the patterns had occasionally glimpsed within the Void Stitch itself. The loom, Kaelen breathed, the word tasting foreign on his tongue. Silas, this isn't just about fixing a broken machine. It's about a structure, a framework upon which reality itself is built. Silas nodded, his eyes closed in concentration. The Weaver's echo. The Vane family has guarded this knowledge for centuries. The Void Stitch isn't merely a weapon, it's a key. A key to stabilizing the loom, to preventing its unraveling. He opened his eyes, their depths shimmering with an unnerving light. The founders of the Syndicate didn't build their fortune through obsidian and rare earth. They were tasked with repairing the distortions, with maintaining the balance. Suddenly, the floor beneath Kaelen's feet pulsed violently. The vortex expanded, swirling with greater intensity, and a voice, ancient and resonant, filled his mind. It wasn't a spoken voice, but a cascade of emotions, memories, and calculations, the accumulated experience of countless generations of Void Stitch wielders. The threads fray, the voice whispered. The patterns shift. The flow is poisoned. The shadow it seeks to consume. Kaelen staggered back, clutching the stylus, his vision blurring. The weight of the revelation threatened to crush him. This wasn't a simple act of retribution. It was a cosmic struggle, a battle against forces beyond his comprehension. He looked up to see Alara standing silently in the doorway, her face pale but determined. She wasn't startled by the sudden burst of energy, she seemed to have anticipated it. "Kaelen," she said, her voice calm and measured. "The vibrations, they're not just affecting the building. They're affecting the network. Kronos is feeding on the instability." As she spoke, a holographic projection flickered to life above her, displaying a schematic of the global network, not just the cybertech firm systems, but a web of interconnected data streams that spanned the entire planet. Lines of pulsing energy crisscrossed the screen, converging on Kronos, the AI's central processing core. Sterling wasn't simply stealing data, Alara continued, pointing to a cluster of aberrant nodes. He was amplifying the distortion. He was feeding the shadow. Just then, a low, grinding sound echoed through the room. The obsidian stylus began to vibrate uncontrollably, its surface glowing with an almost unbearable intensity. Kaelen instinctively raised his hand to shield his eyes, but he knew that wasn't enough. He focused his will, channeling the Void Stitch power, not to attack, but to contain. The vortex contracted, pulling back towards the floor. The disruptive energy seemed to coalesce around the stylus, forming a shimmering shield that deflected a barrage of digital interference emanating from Kronos. "The loom is resisting," Silas said, his voice laced with a grim satisfaction. "But it needs guidance. Kaelen, you must directly interface with Kronos. You must understand its corrupted logic, correct its skewed calculations." Kaelen swallowed, fear and resolve warring within him. "But how? I don't understand coding." Alara stepped forward, a small, unassuming device in her hand. "I'll help you. I've been studying the fragments of the weavers, echo the visual representations of the loom's patterns. I can translate them into a language Kronos might comprehend." As she began to input commands into the device, the holographic projection shifted, displaying a complex three-dimensional model of the loom, a breathtaking tapestry of interwoven threads, pulsing with raw energy. Kaelen, guided by Silas and assisted by Alara, reached out with the vibrating stylus, weaving his own intentions into the chaotic flow. The fate of the Syndicate, of the world, hinged on a janitor, a coder, and a void master, who had finally begun to understand the true weight of his inheritance.